All right, so thanks for coming out tonight. It was good talking to some of you guys beforehand, and I realized that it might be helpful for you guys to see what I actually do. So I'm going to try to modify my talk a little bit to show some code and show you guys what it means to be a software engineer manager, at least for me. So bear with me. But like Brenton said, my name is Syneva Runyan. I'm an engineering manager at MailChimp and a CS grad student at Georgia Tech's online master's computer science program. And I'm going to talk about a time I felt out of place and felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I'm going to explain what the imposter syndrome is and how many people have it. And then I'm going to talk about what you can do to help combat it if you ever feel like you have the imposter syndrome. So first off, jumping into story time, this is where I'm going to switch laptops very carefully. Is there an input?
It should automatically. Did you put it in the mini DV? The connection didn't quite make it. Oh, you put the USB-C.
So despite the fact that I work in tech, I obviously still have problems hooking up computers to screens. So
here we go.
Always a fun challenge working in tech. All right. So on any given day as an engineer, this is kind of what I'm spending most of my time looking at. This is a code editor that I use. This is code. And this here is an example of something I built. So I work on websites. I specifically manage a team with 4 engineers who build websites. So let's say I'll come into work one day and I'm asked to update this text. So right now it says edit and save to reload. And I want it to say, hi, Syneva. So I might do something really simple, like just update the text here. You can see all of a sudden, my website now says, hi, Syneva Runyan. So what I did there was pretty simple. I just updated a line of text. But when you look back, you switch back to this editor, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that supports the creation of this website. There's this terminal running, so I can stop this. And this needs to be running to support my code. I obviously have the browser here where I actually need to be switching back and forth between my code to see what I'm building. You see this kind of complex folder structure here. So there's node modules, there's a build, there's a style sheet, there's the actual JavaScript file and some markup here. There's a lot going on. And after like 8 years of working in software, you think I would know what I'm doing. But sometimes I walk into work and I feel like I know absolutely nothing. Someone will ask me a really simple question like, what is a p tag? And sometimes my mind just blanks. Can I switch back to this? Yeah. And I experienced this self-doubt a lot. Does anyone else have experiences like that where you're sitting at a table, you feel like you should know what you're doing, people think you know what you're doing, but you feel like you don't? Okay, yeah. I got a few hands. Well, it turns out what that feeling is sometimes is something called the imposter syndrome. So people have actually done research on this. And it happens when internal experiences, it happens when you experience intellectual phoniness. So basically what that means is that there's a voice inside your head telling you that you're not good enough. Even though I'm qualified, I'm finishing up a master's degree, I've spent 8 years working in software, I still feel like I'm not good enough sometimes. But it turns out I'm not the only person who feels this way. According to a study published in the International Journal of Behavioral Science, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at any point in their life.
Those other 30% of people are lying.
Yeah, exactly. Other 30% of people are lying. In tech specifically, there was a survey done by Team Blind that said that 58% of tech employees experience imposter syndrome as well. And really, that's no surprise. So you saw when I pulled up my code editor, there are all of those files to know. I had the terminal running. I had to switch back and forth between the IDE and the website. And this is a picture of some of the technologies that I work with. And if you can name every single one of these pictures, like, you are the perfect employee and you probably don't exist. So it's really common for people who are software engineers to experience imposter syndrome, even if they know a lot about what they're doing, even if they're well educated, even if they have all the tools they need to be a successful engineer, they might feel like every once in a while they don't know what we're doing. So what can we do when we find ourselves experiencing imposter syndrome? One of the best things you can do is actually build relationships in this field. So if you find someone you can be open, honest, and vulnerable with, that person can be there to tell you, hey, like, I know you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but it turns out you actually do. So it's really important to have relationships with people in your field who can help build your confidence and support when you need it. Another thing you can do is take the perspective of learning from failures. So you saw me struggling up here to switch between laptops. So that's something that like immediately makes me feel like I don't know what I'm doing up here. But rather than just like getting down on myself and sitting down and crying in the corner over there, it's really important that I learn how to hook up laptops to a screen now next time. So having that attitude that just because you do something wrong doesn't mean you're a terrible person or a terrible developer, a terrible engineer is important to have. It's also important to celebrate successes. So I put this example here. It's called The Importance of Donuts. And this is somebody who's a very successful software engineer. She's a director of engineering as well at several companies. Started this blog where every time she did something successful in her career, she would eat a donut and she would post about it. So not only is this incredibly tasty, but it's also something that whenever you do fail or you find yourself questioning or doubting that you know anything, you can look back and you can say, hey, maybe I messed up this time, but look at the time I built a website ABC. Or look at the time I graduated from Refcode. Or look at the time I did really well at that meetup. So it's important to celebrate your successes as they happen. This is another thing I thought was really great, a great way to combat imposter syndrome. So recognizing why you might feel the way you do. So Valerie Young, who this quote is from, she's an internationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome. And she talks about a sense of belonging fosters confidence. If you're the only one or one of a few people in a meeting, classroom, field, or workplace who looks or sounds like you, then it's only natural you'd sometimes feel like you don't totally fit in. Instead of taking your self-doubt as a sign of ineptness, recognize that it might be a normal response to being on the receiving end of social stereotypes about competence and intelligence. So breaking down that quote, what does that mean? So as a woman in tech, I'm oftentimes the only woman in a meeting. I work with a team of 4 male engineers, and sometimes that just makes me feel out of place. Does anyone ever feel out of place? Okay, I feel a few nods. Sometimes that feeling of being out of place makes you question whether or not you belong somewhere. And then that questioning of whether or not you belong somewhere can make you feel like you're an imposter, that you don't belong there at all. But that's really not the case. So having a perspective of saying like, hey, maybe I feel weird in this situation because I'm different than everyone else around me. Maybe that's why I feel weird. Maybe it's not that I don't belong. Maybe it's just I'm different. So that's a really cool perspective you can take to combat imposter syndrome. In conclusion, I hope you guys learned a little bit about imposter syndrome. Know that if you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, you're not alone. Again, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And know that there's strategies out there that you can use to combat it. So celebrating your successes, learning from your failures, having the right perspective of your situations, leaning on your community are all really great ways to combat imposter syndrome. There's a whole bunch of resources you can find online as well. So this talk isn't unique. There's a lot of people who write articles. Again, I quoted a lady who has a PhD who does a lot of work in imposter syndrome. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go online and just Google it, and I promise you there'll be so many resources. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, Brenton will be able to answer specific questions about the program. I think generally what I can say though is when I started pursuing my career, I didn't know anything about computers. So you're not alone there at all. Like I didn't even know what code was. I didn't know what HTML looked like, and there's all of these things like this slide here. Like 10 years ago, these were just pretty pictures.
Yeah.
Like meant absolutely nothing. And I think you bring up a lot of good points about like barriers to entry and things that would be difficult, but I don't think you should be scared. I think maybe you could see it as a challenge. And I think the Refcode community here, so like coming to meetups, there's going to be people here, hopefully, who feel the same way. And I think the next speaker is going to be really great to hear as well, because she went through the course and is a software engineer now. So she has a really great perspective on kind of like what it took to go from knowing nothing to being a successful software engineer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I'm sorry I speak so quietly and quickly. I know I need to work on that.
Did you ever have to fake it to make it?
Every day.
Is that different than imposter syndrome, or is that just a natural, like as you progress in your career and get into bigger things?
Yeah.
You jump into the deeper end. Then.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the question was two parts. The first is, do I ever feel like I have to fake it to make it? So do I ever feel like I need to pretend like I know something in order to be taken like seriously and progress? I feel like I do fake it to make it every day. I think I like to project confidence, and I think because I'm able to project confidence at work, people do take me more seriously. That doesn't mean that's how I feel, and that's why it's faking it, right? Is because I'm able to conduct myself professionally and speak confidently at work, but I don't feel that way. The second part of the question was, is faking it to make it the same or different than imposter syndrome? I think it's a little bit different. I think faking it to make it might be something people use to cope with imposter syndrome, but there's actually a lot of like specific criteria and research once you dig into imposter syndrome on like what qualifies someone for it. And really it's more about, let's see, that feeling of phoniness more so than like an action.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening, you guys. I'd love to hear about any of your experiences if you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, or ways you cope feeling that way too afterwards. So feel free to find me and talk.
Thank you, Syneva. Thanks That was really good. I'm very glad too that we had some good questions. I thought those were some good insights, Syneva. Thank you. I want to say one thing about the fake it till you make it thing. And this is just my perspective, but in my perspective, the job of a software engineer is to not know what you're doing. And let me explain what I mean. So think about what they're doing in there. This is construction. If you're building a house, you build one house, and then what do you do after that? You build another house, and you build another house, and you build another house. In software, if you solve a problem one time, what do you do next? You copy and paste it. And then you don't ever have to solve that problem again. You solve it once, and it is solved forever because you don't have to rebuild it the way you build a house. You just copy and paste it. So as a software engineer, if you are running into something that you already know what you're doing, you already know how to solve it, then you're not doing your job right. Your job is to be solving problems that you don't understand. Your job is to not know what you're doing. And so it's very important to become comfortable with approaching a problem and having that feeling, I have no idea how to solve this. And that's exactly what my job is to not know how to solve this and figure it out. So that fake it till you make it, I don't think that's faking it. I think that's just what the job is. That's my perspective anyway. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker now.